Hi, I'm Anne Marie with the Oregon Farm Bureau, and welcome to this episode of FRED Talks. And with me today is
Shay Myers, CEO of Owyhee Produce.
Shay. Can you just give me a little background about yourself and your farm?
That I could do. Third generation farm kid, located in Nissa, Oregon. At least that's where the base of the majority of our farm ground is. We farm between basically Vail and Adrian, and then we do a little bit of growing on the Idaho side as well. I've been back on the farming operation since 2005. And this is kind of an odd situation for a lot of people. The farm is on my mom's side of the family. Everyone's always like, well, where's your dad? He's a banker. He was smarter than farming, I guess. I work with my mom, my uncle, and my cousins, and my brother-in-law just came back into the operation as well.
Oh, very cool. So it's truly a family farm.
So we grow 7 to 8 different crops. So I say asparagus to watermelon, but we do asparagus, beans, corn, mint, onions, sweet potatoes, watermelons. I'm sure I missed something. Sugar beets, probably the other main one that I missed.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to reach out to you was I heard a little bit about what happened on your farm recently. Can you tell us a bit about the situation?
Yeah, so we've struggled for a long time with labor in general. We started using the H-2A agricultural visa about 5 years ago. We've used that program consistently ever since then. What basically happened is we, through a delay, our date of need, which is how you filter your applications, you say, okay, I need the folks here on date X, and for us that was March the 21st. We've learned over time that we need to pad that number, and so we did by a little bit, almost a month in fact. And here we are on April 30th, still 2 to 3 weeks away from actually having those workers here to do what we contracted them for, and that's picking asparagus. So we have just under 100 acres of asparagus. We use domestic crews combined with the H-2A workers to get that work done. And in this case, we've been able to harvest about 2/3 of our crop up to now. We lost and had delay by one of the fields completely until we were able to source additional labor. So that's the event that a lot of people, well, I guess the rant initially that a lot of people heard about on that TikTok video and elsewhere. And then the community, free asparagus day that we did a week ago. Well, Saturday, whatever date that was, I don't know what that was. Saturday, I should know because it was a crazy day. Saturday, the 24th, we ended up with almost 6,200 people at the field to pick asparagus that day. We thought maybe we'd have 500 or 600, so it was about 10 times as many people as what we expected. But I guess free asparagus and food waste reduction is pretty motivating for a lot of people. So we set up and planned for 600 and ended up with 6,000.
Wow, that's incredible. And
yeah.
just for the people who maybe don't understand the whole growing process. So obviously when the crops are ready to be harvested, they're ready to be harvested. It's not like you can wait.
Exactly the problem. I mean, when you have a date of need, especially on something like asparagus, maybe if it was a wheat crop or a corn crop or something like that, you could wait. But when it comes to asparagus and a lot of other perishable commodities, when it's time to harvest, it's time to harvest. And so when we didn't have those workers and we didn't have an alternative source for regional labor to come in and help us, we lost about 10 days worth of harvest. And basically asparagus just keeps growing and getting longer and longer and longer. So to try and make something good out of the situation, we allowed people to come in and pick that asparagus and take it home.
Okay, so they picked it not for you guys, but for themselves. It was
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't at that point it wasn't marketable. Maybe for processing, but it wouldn't have been marketable for retail because it was too long and too flowered. Great for home use.
What percentage of that is of the total asparagus harvest was that was not able to be picked, just to get an idea?
That represents about 10% of the whole harvest, roughly.
And a decent chunk of money, I'm sure.
Yeah, what walked out the door or out of the field that day was roughly $200,000.
Wow. How do you know, like poundage approximate?
Yeah, about 100,000 pounds. It's somewhere between 80 and 100,000 pounds total that was picked, or that was in the field. We didn't get everything picked. There's probably closer to 120 or 30,000 pounds, but even with 6,000 people, they weren't able to get everything picked.
Have you ever done anything like that before?
Never done anything like that before. 20 years, this is the first time that we've ever found ourselves in a position where even with lots of phone calls and effort, we couldn't find an alternative source of labor.
So what does this situation kind of highlight? What do you think needs to be the broader conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's multifaceted. Number one, the overall need for migrant labor. So, I mean, if you look at the number of people that are coming on H-2A visas, that number increases more and more every year. In fact, this is the highest number of workers that's ever been requested in 2021. So the processing is challenging in and of itself because of the numbers. Then you have, the crossings at the border and all of the processing with those unexpected refugees that are trying to gain access to the States, I think has an impact. You have the unemployment benefits, which we can't compete with, somewhere between $20 and $22.50 an hour. Unemployment being paid by the government currently. And the regionality where we're at in Oregon and Idaho, where we're really close to Boise, and Boise is one of the fastest growing areas for population growth in the United States. So there's lots of pull for construction and landscaping and every job imaginable there. So it was kind of what I like to call a trifecta. It wasn't just one event, it was a chain of events all occurring at the same time that put us in the position that we're in today.
And what kinds of things are being done or could be done to help farmers with labor intensive crops?
Yeah, it's a pretty complicated question. I wish it was super straightforward. I mean, I think the processing at the border, the H-2A program is a bit cumbersome and overcomplicated. I understand why it's that way because they're concerned about the well-being of those that come on these programs. But there's really quirky things that just don't make sense. For example, we've had folks that in the past, more than a decade ago, were in the United States legally, right? And if they were ever caught on the border, fingerprinted, that's in the system, and the government knows that they crossed illegally. Those folks have been coming for 5 years now, and legally on the H-2A program. And every single year they get approved, and then they get flagged for what they call a fine, or I wish I knew the correct term right now. But basically they're like, hey, you came to the United States illegally, you're not going to be able to cross on time and you have to pay a fine. And that's for the government to say, hey, we knew you were here and it's going to cost you something. The problem is they don't just do it once. We've had people that have paid this fine 4 times now, and you don't know whether or not they're going to get flagged until they're flagged. So we're expecting them to come to work. And then they tell that worker, okay, it's 30 days before you can enter the United States, 30 to 60 days. And you have to pay the fine. Well, they're not punishing the worker, they're punishing the employer who's trying to bring them because of the need that we have to bring them. So that's a really quirky thing that doesn't make sense. That should easily be able to be fixed. I would say if you've paid the fine and you've had to wait the 30 to 60 days once, doesn't need to be repeated. And if it is going to be repeated, then it should be part of the policy so that myself as an employer, I can make the decision of whether to bring those folks on a contract or not, because our expectation has been every time, and we're starting to change our policy, but not based on any governmental policy, just based on a bureaucratic process, that we are not going to bring those guys that keep getting flagged, even though they're not supposed to get flagged and they're not supposed to have to wait. So that's clarity could be handled there really easily. There also needs to be a process for expediting, and a real process for expediting. You can expedite the process, but it's laughable. So for example, with USCIS, our workers, so that it goes through 2 processes. You've got the Department of Labor who will approve your contract for bringing H-2A workers, and then it goes through USCIS. Department of Labor approved our contract and said it was fine. It went to USCIS, and then there was something they didn't like. They didn't make us aware until 5 days after our date of need that they needed more paperwork. So 5 days after we expected them to be here, and we didn't get an email or a phone call, we got a certified letter in the mail saying, this is what you're missing. We need this to be clarified. So we didn't respond by email or by a phone call because we can't. We put it back by in US postage, no FedEx, no UPS, US postage, put it back and sent it. So we lost 7 or 8 days just in the process of mailing the information back and forth for the clarification that they need. There's no reason for that in 2021. We're having this meeting right now. The government officials are having these same types of meetings. We can sign documentation electronically. This could be solved in hours, not in weeks. And so that is an additional problem, I think, overall.
You heard much about the Farmworker Modernization Act?
The Farmworker Modernization Act seems to be, I read through the bill by request of congressmen in 2 states. It seems like a really equitable way of doing this, both allowing those that have been working in agriculture a path to citizenship, or at least to legal status. It requires the E-Verify for farm employers, which is currently not required. And it allows for continued access to a viable H-2A program. So overall, I think it should work. The funny thing about, and I've had this conversation a lot the last week after after the events that have happened with the asparagus, farmers are in a position where we can't win right now. On the extreme right of the spectrum, we have folks that are upset that we're allowing, even on an H-2A, that we have immigrant workers coming in, legal or not, but in this case legal, taking American jobs, right? We have that position. And then on the far left, we have the argument that these contracts that we're doing is in essence human trafficking, that we as farmers don't take care of these people, that they live in terrible conditions and that they're not paid appropriately and that they don't have access to healthcare or travel or all of these things. And so it's a really difficult position, and it's one that really needs to be talked about and understood much better, because there is no winning for us right now in a position where neither side of the spectrum can see the value that we bring as employers and as food providers to our fellow citizens.
What are some things that you do for your employees? And they make decent money as well.
Yeah, so on the Oregon side, we're at $16.34 an hour, plus housing and transportation is supplied for these workers. So those that are coming from Mexico, we pay all of their travel from Mexico here. They have their housing, like I said, their housing and all, like everything except for their clothes is provided. They do have to provide for their own meals, but we transport them to the fields and back every day, to the bank, to the laundromat, anything that they need to do during the week. They have access to transportation to do that. On the Oregon side, they still qualify for the retirement plan. So they've got a 3% match on their retirement. And they also have healthcare that's provided if they want to opt into it. Some opt in, some don't. So we're talking about a lot of benefits. Most of these workers, and this is where the left extreme side doesn't understand, most of these workers are making more than a white collar professional in Mexico, 2 to 3 times that in a lot of cases. If you're a medical doctor, even a surgeon in Mexico, these folks that are coming here are making more than that, and they don't have any cost other than their food while they're here. So all of that money is able to be sent back to Mexico. It's an extremely valuable position. We have people constantly reaching out via social media and any other method possible, essentially begging for an opportunity to come here. So they want to come here. They're excited to come here. They see the value, and yet we fight the human trafficking. We're exploiting people on the opposite end of the spectrum as well.
Kind of connecting the dots for anyone who might be watching this. So not having enough ag labor ends up with you having a field that can't be picked. And then what about the end consumer? Would it impact someone at the grocery store?
I don't think it's gotten to a point where it's affected the consumer. And even if we doubled commodity prices on a lot of these specialty crops, there's so much margin at retail that it would take even more than that for the consumer to see those increases in pricing. For example, I'm going to revert to onions. Onions are marked up between 800 and 1,000% at retail, 8 to 10 times the markup over their cost. So it's going to take a lot for the consumer to see the difference because they're already paying that today. Asparagus is a little bit different. It tends to trade at retail a lot closer to the commodity price. And so the way that it's going to affect them on things like asparagus is that production is going to shift south. 80% of all asparagus grown in the United States, that production has shifted to Mexico and Peru. That means that the people that are, that we hear complaints about making $16 an hour plus all those other things. So the effective pay is about $22.50, by the way, housing, transportation, all those things. So essentially making $22.50 an hour. We're pushing those jobs now south of the border where they're going to make $8 per day. That's the consequence of our actions in not aligning the policy and making sure that farmer, consumer, and politician are on the same page. If we're okay with our food being grown in Mexico, then and that's our policy, then we just have to realize what that means from a human capital and labor standpoint and from a risk standpoint as Americans. But more and more and more of our food production is going south of the border.
But no one has as strong of like environmental standards and things as the United States. I mean, that's another reason why we want it grown locally.
Water usage, yeah, every aspect. I mean, if you want to compare us to Europe in a few aspects, so we might be weaker. But in North America, there is definitely, or in the Americas, period, there is not anyone in a stronger position environmentally. That includes, pesticide restrictions and herbicide restrictions. It includes sustainability practices like soil erosion and water usage. I mean, it includes every aspect of what we're doing. If you want safe food, we're going to give you the safest food in the world from right here at home. And so, do we want that, or do we want cheap food? And it's coming to a point where the consumer, and usually we decide cheaper, right? This shirt I'm making, that I'm wearing, is probably made in Malaysia or China or somewhere like that. We made the decision a long time ago from textiles that we didn't care what the human cost was, that we cared more about the retail cost for us at the store. And I'm afraid that that's where we're going to go. But the difference is we can live for a week, a month, or a year without textiles, without clothes. They're in our closet and we can keep wearing them and using them. We can't live like that for even a week without food. So the security risk that we're taking by allowing our food production to go to other countries that are cheaper to produce in is a lot more significant risk.
We hear all the time that lawmakers love the family farmer and things, but we need some more support, or definitely some changes, in order to prevent what's happening to you from being more widespread.
Yeah, I mean, and it is getting more and more widespread. I think ours was a little bit of an extreme event because of the time constraints that we found ourselves in. We were just starting up for the year, but this is not a rare occurrence across agriculture. It's not a rare occurrence across food service and the restaurant industry. I mean, there are chronic shortages across the board. Trucking and transportation is another place where there's massive shortages. Freight numbers in the United States, for per mile, have more than doubled. A lot of people don't realize that, but they've more than doubled in the last calendar month, or in the last calendar year. More than doubled.
So if you hadn't had those folks come out to pick the asparagus, it would just simply die in the fields, right? So it was a food waste issue on top of everything.
Yeah, it would have. So an asparagus is a perennial. So we will pick an asparagus field every single day for our 12 to 14 week season. Every day, every acre is picked. So what we did in this case, otherwise what we would have done is brought what we call a rod weeder in. We would have chopped everything off right before we had a crew available, and everything would have just laid in the field. And then we would have started picking again as the labor became available.
What kind of comments did you get from community members who came out to the farm that day?
There were a lot of thank yous. I mean, there was and people who were really trying to, they weren't there for the free asparagus. Some people were, some weren't, but the ones who were there were trying to make a difference for our operation and to keep all that food from getting thrown away, and you could see it. And they came up and said thank you, and this is a great idea, and thank you for turning something that could have been only a tragedy into something that was beneficial for the community from a learning experience and from a food waste experience as well.
And I think you certainly was a success in highlighting not only food waste, but the ag labor shortage. I've noticed a couple of news stories about you, and that's been prominent in all the coverage.
Yeah, I think it resonated. It was and on several levels, so it helped.
Another thing that you're very sophisticated at is certainly using social media to tell the story of agriculture. Can you tell us about what platforms you're on? And
I think it's the origin story of why I started this is important to begin with, and the reason that I am on social media and the format that I am is because of a meeting that I had with a produce buyer more than a decade ago now that wanted to see pictures of the trees that onions grow on. And this was a produce buyer. That's the moment that I realized the disconnect, massive disconnect. I knew there was a disconnect between farmers and consumers, but that highlighted how significant the disconnect was between farmers and consumers when even someone within the industry didn't understand something as basic as how onions grow. And so I began the first platform that I really started putting content on was LinkedIn. It's a good platform because of the the B2B aspect, and that's what we're doing. We're really not selling to consumers, but as opportunities arose and the need to share the message with consumers came about, started on sharing messages on TikTok. And some of the videos there, that's really where a lot of this has resonated and gained the most traction. So I have about 12,500 people that follow on LinkedIn, and currently about 270,000 or something on TikTok. So a pretty decent following there. The reason people, and they're totally different audiences, totally different consumers, totally different demographic. And so things resonate differently, but it comes down to the basics. I do a lot of farming 101 or onions 101 or asparagus 101 that just shows people how their food is grown, like kind of the behind the scenes of what an asparagus field looks like, what the packing line looks like, what the trucking, loading a semi truck full of produce looks like, and those things. One of the first viral video really was about storing onions. Folks didn't realize that a lot of crops in North America are stored and marketed as they come out of storage. And then obviously most recently the video talking about the shortage of labor. So for those that are looking for that type of content, I'm Shay Farm Kid on TikTok, and then it's just Shay Myers on LinkedIn. I do dabble with Instagram a little bit, but that's kind of just a byproduct of what I do on TikTok. So the content's there for those that want to learn it, and certainly for those that want to share it. A lot of my content ends up getting shared by produce buyers and produce people in the produce department, for consumers, that kind of thing, because it's really pretty simple stuff.
But yet it's pretty mind-blowing to people who have no idea how onions are grown or if they're stored.
Right. No, it is. And that's the problem. I make this argument all the time about what we do in our industry. Farmers get 7 cents of every consumer dollar that's spent for their commodity that they produce and grow. So we're on average, we're getting, for whether it's wheat or corn or asparagus or watermelon, we're getting 7 cents of every consumer dollar that's spent for those same commodities. So that, and that's forcing us to work on low single-digit margins right now. We're never going to be able to ask for more money if we don't show what it takes. People don't realize the work that we put into having a safe, consistent, viable food supply. And so it's our job in agriculture to do a lot better job showing and sharing what it is that we do and why we do it.
It seems like the most often things that people are most interested in are just like what you're saying, the kind of 101 from the farm.
If I can encourage anyone that's watching me now that wants to go look at my content, it's a lot easier than you think. You might have, might feel a little bit uncomfortable initially in front of the camera, or talking to yourself, holding your phone out here like this, depending on the setting. The good thing is, as farmers, we're usually, we don't have a big audience watching what we're doing, at least not in the moment that we're doing a selfie or something like that. But there's a lot to be shared and a lot that the general public would appreciate. And we need to be doing more to educate the consumer. The other place that's lacking as part of that is the overall organizations. Especially, I called out PMA the other day, the Produce Marketers Association. And the reason that I did that is I feel like they should be helping us tell our story better. It's pretty sad that a guy with zero budget who takes the time to pull his phone out has 2 or 3 or 4, well, 1,200% more followers than someone who's supposed to be representing the industry to the consumer. And so the industries that are supposed to be representing the farm to the consumer need to start supporting that kind of storytelling as well if we're going to make progress.
What are some things you love about being a farmer?
The coolest thing for me is to, regardless of the location, I guess this one was really cool. So recently I was with my family at Disney World. I think that was in January of this year. And we went to check out I always go to the grocery stores to look at the onions. It drives my wife crazy, but there's nothing more fulfilling than to walk in a grocery store and look on the shelf and see something grown by your family on your farm, halfway or all the way across the world or across the country. It's very rewarding. I mean, that feels incredibly rewarding, and you're sharing a meal with people. Some of the most important things they do revolve around food. If we have a birthday party, we're going to eat something. If we have a Christmas or Thanksgiving or a Sunday dinner with our family, it revolves around food. And we're very fortunate to be part of something that's critical, but also enjoyed by so many people. And I think that's where I get my enjoyment. I mean, the process, the constant changes and challenges that come to us are fun if there's not too many. It can get overwhelming too, but it's not the same thing every day. It's not easy, and I think that's part of what makes it enjoyable.
What are you going to be doing on the farm next? What's next in terms of crops?
Asparagus will finish any moment. We're just finishing up our storage crop onions here in Idaho and Oregon, like right on the border where we're at. And then we'll be moving to Central California to our next shipping area in about 2 weeks. So that's kind of my next big undertaking is getting the crop harvested and packed and marketed in Central California. But as far as on our operations here in Idaho and Oregon, mint harvest will start around the 1st of July, soon to be followed by wheat harvest. Then we start onions by the end of July, sweet potatoes shortly thereafter, corn, sugar beets, and all the other crops there, close in succession. We basically have a harvest from April to mid-October. We're harvesting every single month on our farm.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Just encourage everyone again to think about where and how they can educate their neighbors or their friends or other consumers in any way. You'd be really surprised at the amount of interest in what we do, especially in this COVID era, when for the first time ever in living memory, store shelves were empty. People have an understanding that food for the first time, in my lifetime, certainly doesn't come from the grocery store. It has to come from somewhere else. And it doesn't just magically appear on that shelf. That means we have an opportunity and a responsibility as farmers to share that message. And I know that I said this before, previously in the interview, but we've got to speak up. If anyone is even half as exhausted right now as I am with just the bureaucratic challenges, the regulatory challenges, the labor challenges, we're not going to see anything different happen unless we're willing to speak up. And I've been really surprised at how many people have said, hey, thank you for saying something. Thank you for, speaking out. And thank you for being our voice. But it's not going to work if I'm just our voice. We have to gather together and voice our concerns and show people how difficult of a situation it is to be in agriculture without labor in today's world.